All right, everyone. Welcome to Visual Regression Testing with BackstopJS. My name is David Needham. I'm a developer advocate at Pantheon, which means I sort of sit between the developers that work at Pantheon and build the platform, the hosting platform, and the developers outside of Pantheon in the community. So I get to be in the community, learn what everyone needs to make their websites go fast and be secure and all that stuff, and then take it all back to Pantheon so that we're building a platform that is good, basically. So I mentioned this a little bit ago, like 5 or so minutes ago, but there was no way to sign up for this workshop, so I had no way to send out prerequisites or to give you guys a head start on installing anything. So I'm just going to leave this up on the screen for a little bit. If you intend to follow along, then it would be helpful if you have Node.js and NPM installed locally. Also, if you're on a Windows machine, having Python installed, I believe is required. Also, we are going to be using BackstopJS, surprise, surprise. So you will need to install that as well. And then a little bit later at the end of the day, we'll be using a standalone Node app that we'll get to when we get to that section. I am recording this. I suspect just my voice will be able to be picked up, so I'll be repeating if we get any questions. But you might want to go to the URL at the top, visual-regression.davidneedham.me. That will take you to this presentation so that you can click links and you can copy code examples and things like that. And because of the nature of this workshop, so I guess a little bit of context, the only other time I've given this workshop, it was a full day workshop. This is 2 hours. So as a result, I am not going to be able to stop if you can't install the software right or if it doesn't quite work right for your computer. However, my colleague, Drew Gorton, is here. Drew and I, and just full disclosure, Drew and I would say are pretty beginners when it comes to visual regression testing. Everything that we learned is from a class like this, from our colleague, Andrew Taylor, and through the little bit of experimentation that we've done to, for our own personal projects and things like that. So I am here today to share everything that I know, but we're really only going to be scratching the surface of visual regression testing with BackstopJS. Let's see, what else? As I mentioned, we have an hour and 45 minutes or so to go through this, so it's going to be a little bit fast, but it will be recorded. If you would like to get a copy of this, I don't have a piece of paper, but I would love to, maybe Drew, if we could get a piece of paper, you could add your email address. I would be happy to email you the recording of this afterwards, and you can go through it on your own later. You could share it with your team or anyone else that would like to watch it. Oh, that would be great. Thank you. Oh, I have a pen. I'm gonna give Drew a pen, and then you can just pass it around, I guess. If you want to add your name to the list, feel free to. If you don't, just pass it on, and that's okay.
Is it okay that BackstopJS fails to install globally?
BackstopJS is failing to install globally.
And then install BackstopJS fails.
I'm not sure.
It's typical with NPM, I know, but
yeah. Unfortunately, that's one of those things that I can't stop to debug.
Where is anybody using Needham for Mac systems? Huh? Okay.
I have seen that problem in a class before, but I don't remember exactly what the fix was, so I apologize. But I will be at the booth, at the Pantheon booth, for the rest of the week as well. So if you do have a problem that you can't get through, please do come to the booth, and I'd be happy to work with you then, and we can go through this again together. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Let me skip back to my slide. So we're going to start with an introduction and kind of getting set up, which we've done a little bit of already. Then we're going to explain exactly what visual regression testing is. Then we'll introduce BackstopJS. We'll talk about some ways to automate visual regression testing with continuous integration. And then we'll just demonstrate and show you how to use the standalone Node app that my colleague, Andrew Taylor, created to kind of make this process a little bit easier. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. And again, we haven't done this in a 2-hour format. I'm not sure if this is going to go long or if it's going to go short. we'll see how it goes. And if we have time left over, I'd be happy to help people individually. Okay, so let's start with visual regression testing. So by show of hands, who here has used some form of visual regression testing in the past? Okay, a few people here and there. Okay, so let's just start with the basics. Like, what exactly is visual regression testing? Well, the definition of regression is to return to a former or less developed state. The thing that we're trying to test is when we change something on our site, does it regress? Does it become broken? Is it going backwards in its process to being completed? And we want to be able to test that and discover that before we deploy that to the live site. So visual regression testing is a way of checking for that. So as an example, we have this site here. It's just a quick screenshot of one of the sites we're working on. And then here's the site after. Who here can spot what changed between those two? Yeah, it's really, really hard to see. Between the two, here they are side by side. It can still be a little hard to see exactly what changed between the two. But using visual regression testing, we can let the computers do the hard work. We can let the computer compare the screenshots pixel by pixel and show us and highlight the things that are actually different. So we've highlighted that actually the text color on those H2s have changed. So it was blue, it changed to green. All right, it's a pretty simple example. So the visual regression test that we're going to be running with BackstopJS generates a report for you that is either pass or fail. You set the threshold for what constitutes a pass, but most commonly, we're going to be going for a very like pixel perfect example. A lot of times when we make changes to our site, like a security fix, for example, we're not expecting anything to be different visually on the site. So we're going to want our threshold to be very small. So we'll be able to see if the test fails and have a side-by-side comparison of the different versions of the site. There are lots of benefits to this, as you can imagine. So we're going to be comparing a development site that I'm going to be working on locally. You could also be working on a development site on a hosting provider or somewhere else. And then we're also going to have the reference, the production site. And we're going to be comparing these. So as we're working, in my example, as I'm working locally, I can run this test whenever I want and see what's changed in my version versus the live version. That way I can check to make sure that only the things that I'm expecting to change are changing. Some other benefits here of visual regression testing is that we can test for multiple viewports. So it's fairly easy for us to look at our desktop, our laptop, and see exactly what it looks like side by side. And maybe we do a pretty good job of catching the things that are different. But how often do we test mobile, tablet, all of the different viewports that are actually important, making sure that that little CSS change that we made is only going to affect the thing that we expect it to affect, only on the devices that we expect it on. So with visual regression testing, we're going to be able to define all the viewports that we're actually concerned about testing on, and it will automatically run and do that for us. We're also going to be going through a process a little bit later for crawling our website, so we don't have to manually set up the script to scan our site page by page. It could do the entire site at once. This can be really helpful for checking to make sure that nothing breaks, of course. And these tests are relatively easy to write, which we'll see in a minute. There are some limitations, though, some gotchas. It's pretty easy to have a lot of noise, meaning things that we don't really care about that are technically different, but things that don't concern us. In a visual regression test, when you're comparing pixel by pixel, if things shift by 1 pixel, maybe we don't care, or maybe we do care. It will highlight that. And it's also easy to have issues with things like dynamic content or content that's coming from external websites like YouTube, Twitter, things you might have embedded on your page, as well as content that might be changing on the live site versus your local site. So if you have that sidebar list of recent blog posts or hot products or whatever it is, if that's changing on the live side on a regular basis, you're going to be getting a lot of false negatives on your own test because you may not have that pulled down locally yet. So again, I mentioned security updates. Now this is obviously a really old version of Drupal, but when you have a security update, when you apply that, you don't expect anything to change on the site. You expect your site to be secure, but you don't expect anything to look different or even functionality necessarily to be different. So as we're applying security updates, it can be a really great use case for using visual regression because you want it to be pixel perfect. You want it to be exactly the same before as it was after, or after as it was before. All right, so here are the before and after changes. What are the differences between these? And I apologize, it's a little bit hard to see with the projector brightness here. But actually the difference is nothing. The security update applied successfully. There is no difference between the two screenshots we have here. Everything is perfect, so we can apply those updates and even write a script to apply updates automatically when these tests pass, which we'll also talk about a little bit later. Theming is also a great use case. If you've ever said to a colleague or the client or someone, hey, this will just be a quick fix. I'm just going to make this little change. It'll be just fine. Well, as it says, you know, it often isn't. It can be dangerous to make a quick little change, or you make a little CSS fix, not knowing that it changed some other page on the website that you weren't looking at, or it changed on mobile in a way that you weren't expecting. So visual regression testing will take the responsibility out of your hands or out of your colleagues' hands and really automate the process with robots, with your computer, to check to make sure everything is the way it should be. All right, so let's actually jump into Backstop.js. This is the tool we're going to be using today. Backstop.js does as much as it can to automate this process for us. So before Backstop.js, there are tools where you could take screenshots and compare, you know, run the screenshots through the process and it would compare them. But this takes a little bit of a step further and makes it easier just by passing a URL. It's able to render the website and actually, you know, step through the website, even have different actions, you know, simulating clicking or hovering or things like that, using Chrome or headless Chrome or Phantom or Slimer or any of those other rendering libraries. Also, we're able to see these visual changes directly in our browser. It will pop up in a window, as we'll see. And you can do a little slider to see side by side what changed between the two. But it also has a command line. So you can get a pass or fail response in the command line so that as you run a test, a script goes and does something as a result of it working or not. We will also be looking at continuous integration. So this process does work really well when you can automate it in a continuous integration workflow. And then there are many ways to work with Backstop.js. I mentioned I'm only going to be using the few and kind of demonstrating the few ways that I've personally used it. So we're going to be installing Backstop.js globally and then running it on a project. You can also install Backstop.js in a particular project, so you have your own customizations for that project. Or we'll also be showing this example later on, to use a standalone packaged app. So we'll be using Node to run an app that is pre-configured with Backstop.js, just as if you had an app running on your computer all by itself. You can just run the app and it will automatically do whatever test that you set up. And so this really does just come down to 3 commands, and we'll be stepping through those next. All right, so as we go through and make changes to our report, we're going to be having this Backstop.js or Backstop.json file, which has all of our configuration. This is where we define our viewports. So you can see here, viewports are just the different screen sizes that we want to use. We start by defining a name. We have a width and a height. And you see here we have vertical tablet, horizontal tablet, desktop. We can do as many or as few of those as we want. We also have scenarios. So you might have a scenario for the home page, a scenario for the About Us page, a scenario for the Contact Us page. As many as you need can show up there. From here, we have a label to define what this particular scenario is. You also have a URL, which is the live production version of the website. And then we have a reference URL, which is going to be my local version of the site or your development environment. And then you do also have options to hide selectors. So again, if you want to remove that dynamic content that might be constantly changing and causing your tests to fail, you can do hide selectors, choose a class or an ID, and it will exclude that from the report. So it won't show up in your screenshots and it won't cause your reports to fail. You can also choose specific selectors. So if instead of choosing the entire page like we've done here with document, you could choose only specific things. So you could say, I want to test the main menu. I want to test the sidebar. I want to test the footer. I want to test whatever list of things that you want. And it will do those individually based on the selectors that you've defined. All right, you can also set a delay. So if it takes a little bit for your page to load, you can define that. And then the threshold, this is what it will take to pass or fail the test. And then there's some additional information here that we're not going to spend as much time looking at. But all right. And then again, we end up with this report, which we'll be spending a little bit of time looking at. All right, so let's actually get into running BackstopJS now. So I have this installed locally on my computer, globally. So I'm going to start just by navigating to my project locally. Actually, let me start by showing you the URLs. So I have up here, I've used Lando to install this website locally. So it's Pantheon Weekly Demo Site.lando.site. And then I have my live version of the site, which is pantheondemo.com. These are the two that I'm going to be comparing as we go through. Pantheon Demo is obviously the live version of the website. It has a purple button here for buying tickets. On my local version, I've changed it to green just to demonstrate, and that's the change that we're expecting to see as we go through and do these tests. All right, so let me open up my command line. I've already navigated to my project folder. This is where that site is locally on my computer. Now to get started with Backstop, all I have to do is run backstop init. And this is generating the config file in this directory and getting everything ready to go to actually run a backstop test. So if I open this file up, backstop.json, I can see all of the configuration that's been here already. So just by doing backstop init, it generated this file with some example code or configuration. We have a viewport for phone, a viewport for tablets. We have some on before script and on ready script. There's some stuff here that we really don't need. It's a little bit overkill. We don't have to remove it, but we can definitely remove some of these things if we choose to. There's a label here. I'm going to change the label. I'm going to say this is my Pantheon demo, because that's the site that I'm testing. There's also a section here for cookie path. This is another one of those that you can feel free to remove, but it wouldn't matter either way if you do or not. We have a URL, and URL is going to be the site that we're actually running this on. So let me go back to my browser. I'm going to grab the pantheondemo.com site. All right, and then we also have a reference URL. The reference URL is going to be my local site, my Lando site. All right, so again, following the directions here, I've done backstop init, I've edited the backstop.json file, I've added a label, added the URL, and now let's add the reference URL. Okay, I'm going to save this document. Oh, that's a little bit hard to see up there, isn't it? Let me see if I can change that real quick. That's easier, yeah, cool. All right, so I've added the label, the URL, and the reference URL, so that looks good. Next, if I look at my directions, I need to create a new reference screenshot. So the way that Backstop.js works is it generates a reference. It looks at the reference URL that you've defined, and it generates screenshots on that. And then when you actually run a test, it goes out and generates screenshots based on the URL of the live site. and then it compares those two. So we start by doing the backstop reference. And this is going to go through and create the reference files, the screenshots of our reference site, which is going to be our live website. All right, that finished. If I actually open up this folder, I can see here I have this folder for backstop data. If I go in, look at bitmap reference, I can actually see the 2 screenshots that it generated so far. So I have the mobile version and I have the full version of the website, the live website. All right, so the final step here is to run backstop test. And at this point, it's using headless Chrome to go through and compare, kind of go through the site that we've defined and compare. And we can see it actually real quick on the command line here, it failed because it says there's a mismatch. There's the threshold was such that these are not pixel perfect. So if we see here before, or I guess after, before, and then the difference is here. And we can actually get, if we click on it, we'll get the full page and we can do the kind of scrubber to see the difference between the two. Okay, so that's for mobile. And the same thing happened here on the tablet version. So again, it's really easy to highlight the things that are actually different between the two because we can see them visually. It highlights all the things. And it's not uncommon to have things shifted around a little bit. So for everything to be bumped down if something changed in the menu at the top. And changes like that are difficult for us to visually see if it's only by a pixel or two, but by highlighting it, it paints the page with all sorts of color and you can see that it changed. All right, so let's jump back to our slides again. So that was a simple test. We initialized it, and now as I go through and make changes to our theme, it's going to, we're going to be able to run this test as many times as we want and see exactly what's changing. So in this case, because we're doing a theme, we're expecting certain things to be different, right? So the fact that it's failing may not seem like the best, the right thing to do, but it's a way of checking. It's a way of being sure that what you're changing is only affecting what you're expecting it to change and not breaking things in other places on the website. All right, so let's expand this example a little bit. So what happens if we actually make changes to the viewports or the scenarios section? Well, let's actually go in and take a look. So here at the top, we have this viewports section. We currently have one for phone and one for tablet. Let me add a new one here just for desktop. And maybe I'll do width 1440 by height 900 and save that. Okay, let me go back. Let me run backstop reference again because we have a new viewport. We need to regenerate our reference files. Okay, now we need to do another test. So backstop test, it will go through our site with those different viewports and compare them.
Is it possible to do it with multiple URLs?
Is it possible to do it with multiple URLs? Yes, and I'll show that in just a minute. It's okay. All right, so here's our test. It's been updated. We have the phone version, we have the tablet version, and now we have the desktop version. So we have 3 different versions of the site at different viewports to check to make sure that everything works right. All right, so now what happens if we change something else? Like what if we wanted to test more than just the front page of our website? That's easy to do. We have the section here for scenarios. It's easy to define a new scenario, and we can do a scenario for each page that we want to test. So for example, if I come in here, I'm just going to grab these first few ones here. All right, so Pantheon demo, I'm going to do a new one here for node 6, and I'm just changing the URL for these to node 6. All right, I'm going to save. I'm going to go back to my test, and again, regenerate the reference files. And you might have noticed, as we're going through and adding viewports and adding scenarios, this list is growing. We're getting more prompts here as it opens new headless browsers, and it's taking a little bit longer for it to go through and actually test and generate these pages. All right, that's finished. So now let's do the test again. Again, it's having to do this for each of the different pages and scenarios that we defined. So it's up to 6 so far. So here's one with the first page, phone, tablet, desktop, and then for the second page, node 6, phone, tablet, desktop. So it did all of our different pages, all of our different viewports. If we jump back now to our notes, one common thing at this point is forgetting to run backstop reference. If you don't regenerate your screenshots, it's going to fail. You'll get basically just blank screenshots on your page, because if it doesn't have a reference that's been updated with the viewport or the page that you're trying to test, it'll be trying to test against nothing. And naturally, that doesn't work. Also, another common gotcha the last time we ran this class was making sure that you actually have a difference on your site. It might be silly, but if you don't have anything different about your local site and your live site, then you're not going to be able to test this because everything's just going to pass and it's going to look kind of boring, but that's okay. All right, so now scaling though. Obviously, if I'm working solo and I'm just wanting to test this one page and I just have this one little fix I'm doing, everything I've done so far might be good enough. That might be all that I need. But there's definitely a way that we can scale this. We shouldn't have to manually create this file every single time. So we do have this great tool called backstop-crawl. What it will do is actually crawl our website like a spider would, going through all the different pages of our website and automatically generating this backstop.json file. So it will detect all of the different pages that exist on your site and account for those. This works really well if you have a relatively small site, but as you noticed, every page that you add and every breakpoint that you add adds a few seconds of time, both for generating the references and for scanning the site and comparing. So if you have a web page with dozens and dozens of pages, this test is going to take forever. It's not going to be practical for you to do locally as you're theming. It might have to be something that you tie to your test environment before going live to make sure that everything is working. Or more practically, maybe make changes to just your template pages. Maybe you've identified specific pages that are your, this is the ideal blog page. This is the ideal store page. This is the ideal whatever page, and then testing just those to make sure that those pages continue to work as you expect. All right, so let's actually check this out though. This is a pretty easy tool to install. I'm going to start just by npm installing backstop-crawl. I believe I already have it, but I'm going to run it anyway. If you don't have it installed, of course, then you'll want to run this command to get it locally. It's just npm install space -- global backstop-crawl. So now I had installed backstop.js globally, which means I can go and run backstop commands from my command line on any project that I have. I don't have to install it in a specific project. I can just run it wherever I am. And now I'm just doing the same thing for backstop-crawl. So I don't have to install backstop-crawl in this project. I can install on my computer and then run it wherever I need it. All right, so that finished. I can now go here and grab this command. So the syntax here is backstop-crawl for the actual command. The site that we are referencing, or I'm sorry, the URL, which in this case is the live site. We have then an output file, which is going to be the JSON file because we're generating that automatically. We're choosing to ignore the robots.txt file because in this case, we're not a search engine. We are doing this for our own testing purposes, so we can ignore that text file. And then we're defining a reference URL, which is my local development site. Let's go run this from the command line now. So now it's scanning my site, crawling, clicking each of the links, and generating this file for us. So let's open that up. All right, so here it is. It automatically, so it overwrote everything we did before. So if you had stuff before that you wanted to save, you probably would have wanted to create a branch or save it somewhere else. But this generated a single viewport for screen. Maybe you want to add some more, maybe you don't. Either way. We also have a number of scenarios. In this case, the scenarios represent each page that it found when it scanned. So it has our front page, node 16, node 15, node 14, and on and on and on and on. And then it finds all of those. And some of these may not work, like this here, user register destination node comment form. Some of these you might have to make changes to. You know, the crawl isn't perfect. So you can do that if you choose to. Scrolling down. There's also a section down here for Phantom.js for the engine. This is what we're using to actually crawl the website. This worked for me in the past, but I noticed as I was preparing for this class that it stopped working. I'm not totally sure why. However, if I change this to Chromie, which is just the headless Chrome version, which is what we were using on the previous example, then this works just fine. So I didn't have time to debug this for this class, but Chromie will work just fine for you. All right, so let's just say this works. This is what we want. We've saved it. Let me jump back to my slides to make sure there's nothing else. Yes, I mentioned the editing to add Chromie on the list here. And now I just have to get my references and test again. So if I go to command line, let me actually just go up. Backstop reference to regenerate my reference files. Again, I don't know exactly how many pages it found on the site. However, it does take a little bit of time because we have, I don't know, maybe a dozen or more, maybe 24 different pages that it's actually scanning through and taking screenshots of. If I open up my Finder while this is running, I can actually see here. Let's see. This one I think is the one that it's doing right now. And we should see over time it's adding a new file. Oh, that might actually not be it. All right, well, it's still going. Does anyone have any questions while we're waiting for this to complete the reference? Yes, sir.
How would you get that to scan behind a paywall, for instance?
Oh, how to scan behind a paywall. Yeah, that's a good question. So there are scripts that you can execute on here to click buttons on your website and even do things like enter in like a login, for example. I do not personally have as much experience with that depth of using BackstopJS, but that is the area where, let me jump back to my slides here. So if you go to the repository for BackstopJS, it's on GitHub. There's a great reference at the bottom here for all of the different commands that are at your disposal. What you probably want is this part, the simulate user interactions with Puppeteer, Chromie.js, and Casper.js, where you can script out a process that the headless browser clicks and types and does. So you could have it log in and go behind the paywall and test it then. All right, well, it's still running. Looks like it's almost done though. Right, it says that it completed successfully. So I'm going to go ahead and kill that and now just do a test. And this part can take a little bit. So let's go ahead and take another question if anyone has a question about what we've done so far.
Tried other headless browsers?
Have I tried other headless browsers with it? I have not. Yes.
Possible to integrate it, for example, something like browser stack. So you could choose a different device.
Oh, is it possible to use a tool like Browser Stack to choose different devices? Yeah. It seems possible. I mean, Browser Stack has an API, so there might be a way to integrate that, but I'm not totally sure.
Have you written some functional tests with this backstop test?
Have I written some functional tests?
Like BHAT tests?
I've not done any BHAT tests with BackstopJS. A lot of the tools that we've been working with, I've written some BHAT tests that, because of the way that our scripts work, also have some visual regression tests running alongside, but I haven't like personally put them together. All right, so it completed. Everything failed, which is kind of what I would expect, because it's testing all these different pages, and this button is the same. It's been changed on every page. So because this is a demo site, all of the different pages on our site are not super awesome. Like it's not a fully built website. So showing through all the examples isn't super important. But you do occasionally see these errors. And again, this was that it was trying to process the encoded URL. And that's a case where you'd have to just change it in the backstop.json file to account for that. All right, so that finished. It scanned our site. And again, we had a dozen, maybe 24 different pages on our website that it scanned. Naturally, if you had even more than that, if you had hundreds of pages, this would take hours. And that's not something you want to sit for. It certainly isn't practical for theming. So let me jump back to the slides. All right, so again, this is a case where you might want to think about these template pages. So if you have a few different views on your website, maybe you want to have pages for those to scan and test. If you have pages on your website for the blog post, like sort of the ideal blog post, the ideal user bio, the ideal whatever all these are, if you enter those, if you create a backstop.json file for those, then it can be much easier to scan the things and catch the problems before they happen without having to test every single page. So maybe you use the backstop crawl to generate a file just to like run on the server or to run with some sort of a continuous integration process, or maybe you don't. And again, it depends on the size of your site and what you're trying to actually catch with it. All right, so let's actually take a moment to talk about continuous integration. So a lot of the example scripts that we use at Pantheon integrates with continuous integration because it's a way of taking manual processes for building a site or for running tests or for collaborating with a team, and it allows you to automate them and put them on a standard process out in this case, we're using Circle CI. I'm going to be talking about Circle CI a little bit today, but we're not going to be building it out. That would take too long. We actually have a full day class that we're doing at DrupalCon Seattle for Composer, GitHub, Circle CI, and building the whole thing. So we're not going to be building this today, but I'm happy to kind of walk through some of the steps and show an example at the end that you can integrate to basically run automatic updates on a website. Again, I'm coming from Pantheon. A lot of the examples that we're using are from Pantheon, but you can probably adapt these to other hosting options or other continuous integration tools if you have other preferences. All right, so the idea here is that we want to take all of this manual testing that we might be doing and let the robots actually take care of it. We're not great at spotting differences. And if we are if the responsibility is on us to manually test our website after every change that we make, you guys might be perfect. I'm going to forget occasionally. So if we have a process, so a developer workflow in place on our team, where every time that we commit to the repository, it automatically does a visual regression test. And it automatically says passed or failed. And it shows the screenshots right there in the commit log or in the GitHub repo or in the whatever. Then that means that that's one thing that I don't have to do manually, or my team doesn't have to do manually. It just automatically happens, and it becomes part of our approval process for the commit. And this can also be good for, we say here, like greenfield environments. Like if it's a scenario that, like a type of website you've never built before, or you're using tools or techniques that you've never used before, using visual regression can be really helpful to just make sure that things that you're changing are what you expect. All right, so again, we're using CircleCI because it's the tool that we've found works well for most of our examples and is pretty good at the free tier for doing most of the stuff that we're trying to do. And it's pretty easy to set up. It's a pretty readable configuration process. And it allows you to, again, just kind of standardize your workflow and your testing so that it happens after certain workflows or after certain steps in the process. So when you're setting up CircleCI, you're going to be picking a Docker container and going through. And again, we're not going to be spending time specifically on doing this, but you're going to have to configure how this container is actually configured and where it's connecting, where the live site is, where the GitHub repo is, and all those different things. You're also going to be installing certain tools on this container. So, our command line tool is called Terminus, so we'll probably have that installed on our container. You would also have backstop.js. If you're doing the crawl, then you'd have backstop-crawl installed. And you'd be setting all this up so that every time this process runs, the container gets spun up, it runs the test, and then you don't have to think about it anymore. All right, so then again, the process is, when we do a commit, when we push the commit up to GitHub or something like that, it can automatically spin up a development environment, apply this change here, do a visual regression test, and then based on the pass or fail response of that test, we can go out and do other things with our script. So in this case, maybe we go ahead and push the change that we made up to our live site if it's something we trust and if it's a security update. Maybe we update our team via Slack, regardless, so that we know whether this test passed or failed. And I'm going to spend a minute now just taking a look at this real world example. So again, this is assuming that you're using Pantheon. However, it can be adapted to work with other hosting platforms and other tools, other continuous integration processes. And it is just a example script. All right, so this is available. Anyone can go and grab this or fork this and make it their own. But all of the steps are here plainly described. So here's the sort of pseudocode for what's happening and then the actual setup. So let me just step through this pseudocode real quick. So the first step is just making sure that you can speak to our command line tool. The next one is spinning up a multi-dev environment, which in Pantheon speak is really just a branch. It's an environment on a branch. So then we're able to check for updates on that branch. We're able to check to see if there are any updates for Drupal core, if there are any updates for even WordPress core, if there are any updates for modules or plugins or themes or anything like that. And if so, it will actually go through the rest of the process. It will apply all of the updates into this branch. It will go through the necessary steps to generate the URLs and all of that stuff. It will even go through and create backups in our different environments for us because we don't want to apply things before without creating a backup and making sure that everything is all of our bases are covered. And then we do a visual regression test. So we're comparing our live site versus our branch. We're putting them side by side. If everything passes, if there are 0 pixel differences after these security updates have been applied, we automatically deploy that to the live site. So because everything passed, everything works. If that makes you uncomfortable, it can also be configured to say, don't deploy it to the live site, just notify us via Slack so that we know it's ready to go live. And then we can go in and manually approve that change and do it. And then just notifying us via Slack after that. So as part of this process, visual regression is obviously important. It's kind of the key point, the key way of checking to make sure that it applied cleanly without breaking anything unexpectedly. And the way that this script works, I wanted to show this example because I think it does a good job of showing what you can do with BackstopJS in a different way than what I've described so far. The example that I showed you from my command line earlier was me running it on my project locally and just comparing to the live site for the work that I'm doing. This example is something that's being run via Circle CI, via script, and it's all in GitHub. So I don't have anything running locally for this at all. So all of this is managed here within, there's the backstop data, but it's all right here within this. Here we go, backstop-config.js. Within here, we're using a JS file that passes all of these different configuration options. So again, we're testing for various viewports. We're also testing for various scenarios. So we have the home page, but we're actually passing in some dynamic URLs too. So we're able to pass in whatever URLs that we defined elsewhere in the script to say, test on that page and test on this other page or whatever list of other pages we have. And then it just goes on its way and continues and does its thing. But all of that gets outputted here and still gets processed via CI so we can open up our report or provide the report in the commit log so we can actually see what's happening. All right, so at this point, I'm going to say let's take a break. I've covered a lot of information, and it's probably a little bit overwhelming for people who maybe weren't able to get it set up correctly. And it is right now break time for like the last break of the day to like grab some coffee or use the restroom. So let's take a break. Let's meet back at 5, and we'll continue from there. If anyone has any problems or wasn't able to continue with the example, feel free to raise your hand, and Drew and I will walk around and try to help if we can. Right. So there's one person in the class we did last time that actually generated a style guide using selectors. They could say, here's our menu, here's our sidebar, here's our button, here's all the different pieces. And they used BackstopJS to actually create a style guide. So that there's multiple ways to do that. Yeah. That's a good idea.
When you use CI with BackstopJS, can you please make some basic documentation?
Some private
Basic
I'm sorry, I don't
basic documentation.
Not yet.
it depends on what
Because the
CI.
whole time we just you can do it.
Yeah.
You can do it and write some line in the work. Actually, do it this way. Okay, cool. And just let the code. Can you like specify not to take into account the URLs with the rest side? Can you do those?
Like for the crawl, yeah. I didn't see that when I was looking when I was experimenting with different ways of doing it. But I wouldn't be surprised if there was a way to do that. You can have to like fork your project
Inside, maybe.
Change yourself. But it sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. And you had some experiences with GitLab.
I use GitLab. I've heard good things though. So that's
I can tell you good things about it, but there is semi-defined CI tools. Everybody has favorites.
right.
So will it work for this?
Yeah, that's great. You sit later on. He was just saying he's got he had testing wonder. He's got it. Like, can you do both? Yeah, absolutely. So this example actually I think has.
With the auto update example, yeah.
No, I don't know if it does.
I don't know if this one does, but yes, it does.
Yeah. So you just, again, like from Circle or Jenkins, you just run this, run that. More testing. Yeah.
The visual regression test is often much faster than backstop.js, so that might come earlier, so you can test or pass or fail before you can.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it get fails on that, I don't need to do no problem.
Right.
And I'm also like using some shell script to catch the errors of the fails, and I just throws it through the Jenkins and like
Okay, cool.
Okay.
so this
Yeah.
is the
All right.
only
That's good to know.
I
Okay, awesome.
want to do that. Like,
Yeah, yeah. Cool.
I was wondering, for CI testing, do you always take a fresh reference copy, or do you sometimes store them?
I think with continuous integration, it does do a fresh copy because I think it creates the container every time.
Yeah, I was thinking, how would I store that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it does take some time.
Right.
He was this. That gentleman was saying the reason Phantom failed is because it's been removed.
Oh.
It's like they dropped support for it sometime in the last recent update.
Okay. Well, good to
So
know.
that's why.
That explains it.
Yeah. Yeah, it has to be. If you're using it for CI, you have to regenerate reference URLs or the start URL. Yeah.
It would be heavy on the production side. If I really wanted to test 100 pages for every single commit I do.
Yeah. You probably don't want to do 100 pages.
Yeah.
But it depends.
But you could. I mean, if you need that kind of testing, though, you could have that be only the master branch, for example. You would be maybe later testing on feature branch or something like that. Maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah. Exactly. Right.
I was hoping for some smart thing from Dave. We catch this.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all customizable.
Yeah.
You could certainly have it generate the reference file once. And, you know.
Sorry, someone. Yeah.
I will GitLab has stages for artifacts. That's just one pipeline for one build.
Yeah.
Right. I think Circle CI does the same thing. It keeps the artifacts for that build. And then
Yeah, you
later
can't use them for
Yeah.
the next build.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll have to write something myself.
Yeah. Great.
For time, I think based on the slides. I think it's going to finish well. People are asking questions. I have them, so it was all right. Thanks.
So that is my local. So that won't that URL will work. Right? You would need your own local or development URL. Yeah. So for all the examples that I've run, I've compared my live site to my dev site. And so for yours, you just use your live site.
Yeah, and it can be a remote dev though too. It doesn't have to be your local dev.
Right.
You can compare live production and dev up there. So,
Staging. Yep.
So a lot of people signed up for this. I'm gonna also put this in your bag.
Okay. Perfect. I'm using Zoom to record.
Oh yeah. And it's not like the recording is not visible at all. Like it's just the all out. Is that?
No, that's the temperature. That's the weather.
Oh.
So it was visible, but I hid it. Like I don't want to see any of that, so I just did Command H. And
You want water?
oh no, I'm okay with them. Thank you. Yeah, it should be.
Should be correct. So what does this have? I've crashed these before. In my current role, I was ex-CEO. So interested in the conversations, but also I don't want to assume. No, I don't think so. It's labeled CEO. That's no longer mine. I did see that. I did not go through.
Yeah. All right, everyone, welcome back. So for the remaining section, the remaining time that we have today, last 45 minutes, it's not really going to take that long, but we also have this standalone app that was created by my colleague, Andrew Taylor. This was his answer to people who said, everything we've done so far is just far too complicated. I want an easy way to do visual regression testing. Well, the easiest way is potentially going out to a third-party service, because there are third-party tools that you can buy that will do it for you. You can pass in URLs that will run the tests and return a response. But he created this simple little Node app, partly to make it easy for people to just run a test and see what it's like, but also to show what it's like to create an app. So we're not going to create the app here, but it is something you could create for your team or for a project, and even include in a project, so that the tests are baked in and it's easy to run whenever you need to run the test. So to get started with this, I'm actually just going to clone the repo. The repo has everything that we need to run the project. So that's just where I'm going to start. Let me go back to my command line. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to do a git clone. All right, that finished. So I'm going to change into the directory. All right, there we are. Let's continue. So in order to run this example, all that we have to do, well, I did the first step already. I moved into the directory for the repo. Now I just am going to check out a new branch. And I don't necessarily have to check out a new branch, but this is just going to be my way of saving my own changes, basically. So I'm going to start with this. And so I'm calling the branch myhacking1. Now I'm going to do an npm install. And this can take a moment while it installs all of the dependencies and all of the software needed to run this app. So it's doing backstop and installing it here. I don't know if it's doing backstop-crawl, but all of the other pieces that are needed to run it are being put in this folder. Any questions while we wait for this to finish? All right, well, I'll mention one question that someone asked earlier during the break. They asked if it would make sense to basically create a style guide on your website so that you could do a visual regression test against the style guide and quickly see at a glance what changed between the sites. And I think that's a wonderful idea. I think that would make a lot of sense, and it would probably save a lot of time versus testing all of the various pages of your website. But of course, it does make a difference on like how you're using your style guide, making sure that you're updating that consistently and that your themers are following the right process. Cool, so this finished. But one quick more thing, I have seen in the last training where we did this, and we had this long hacking period at the end of the day, where someone actually created a style guide out of their Backstop.js report. So rather than choosing like the entire page to scan, they created each selection, or they selected each element that made up their style guide. And then when they generated the report, it basically was the style guide. So they didn't have it on their website, it was just dynamically being put together based on screenshots of each individual element. All right, so that finished. So let's go ahead and do a npm run start now. All right, so this example was created, again, I said by Andrew for a previous conference, LoopConf. So you'll see some references to LoopConf here. But it is basically going through the process of everything that we did earlier, all of the steps to do the inits, to grab the references, to do the test, and it will do that every time that we run it against a pre-configured site that we've defined. So we don't have to worry about installing this globally. We don't have to worry about configuring anything. It's already ready to go. We just have to run it.
You were saying earlier about the style guide, someone picked that individual element.
Yeah.
Does it pick out like every time there was like an anchor link, or every time there was a H1?
Yeah, so the question was, did the person who created the style guide, did they, have to pick out like every single anchor link, or yeah, it wasn't that granular. It was like, show me the menu, show me a hover on the menu, show me the sidebar, show me a block on the sidebar, things like that. But yeah, I think an anchor link would probably be a little extreme.
Because it would, I think it would find every time that is there.
Yeah. It almost sounds like you could create some sort of a work of art with doing something like that, because it would look so interesting. All right, so it finished. We can see here by comparing these two, let me go ahead and click on this, that this is a WordPress example, but it's doing the before and after. Something changed on one version of the site versus the other version of the site. And it's pretty easy to see at a glance exactly what changed between the two. So quite a lot, actually. Not as much down here. And a few things changed on the bottom here. Platform and contribute changed with about. Interesting. All right, so several things changed. And as we go back, we can see like each different breakpoint, each viewport is listed there. All right, so that's a pretty simple example. We just have to run it, and it does this every single time, so it's consistent. But we can, of course, hack this. We can make it our own. We can change it to whatever we want. This is just an example for us to start with. So to edit this, the app puts this backstop.json file that we've played with today in the includes folder. So to change it, we just have to go in and find it and make the change. So let me do includes backstop.json. And I'm opening it in my code editor. And I can see here, okay, great, it's doing phone, tablet, desktop. Maybe we don't care about the tablet, so let's go ahead and remove those. And maybe instead of the scenario with the home page, maybe we actually just want to do the examples that we did for our previous example. So maybe we want to do, let's see, my local site and my live site. Great. So let's all that we've done changed so far is remove some of the viewports, and we've changed the URL and reference URL. So let's go back and let's just do an npm run start again. And it's going to run the same app again, just with our new configuration in place. So we don't have to worry about doing the references or regenerating those. We don't have to worry about running the test. It's automatically doing that based on our configuration. And it should be a little bit faster since we're only doing 2 viewports. All right, here we go. So this is our example site that we were looking at earlier with the button that's changed. We have our phone version, we have our desktop version, and nothing else. So it's working, it's standalone, and pretty simple, easy example. All right, so this app is meant as kind of showcasing a few different ways of working with the app. So far, we've just had a single site example, very easy, we've made the change. Let's actually save our changes and switch to a slightly more complicated example. All right, so let's switch back, and we're going to run, I'm going to check out the multiple sites example. So this isn't using backstop-crawl, but it is using multiple, scanning multiple sites at once. So rather than just scanning the one site at a time, we can choose which one we want. So I'm going to check out the multiple states or multiple sites branch, and then I'm going to create a new branch just for my own hacking that I'm going to be doing here. And I'm going to do npm install again to install all the dependencies for this version of the app. And again, this will probably take about as long as it took last time. So while this is going, any questions or comments? Hey, it finished. It actually seemed faster for some reason. All right, so then we just do the last one here, npm run start. And the cool thing here is that this has been pre-configured to have multiple sites. So when we run this, it's actually going to ask us, here are the available sites that it's aware of. Which site would you like to test? And we can say, great, let's do the bicycle demo. And I forgot to refresh this site earlier, so it might have issues, but the point is not that the test passes, it's just that we can see that it's working. So now it is testing the bicycle sites example by itself, creating our new reference files. Using all the different viewports. You can see different window sizes I mentioned, and different ports. So this is kind of one of those things where if you are working on this locally and doing this on a fairly regular basis, this would probably be the point where you're about to go to the bathroom or go get a coffee or something like that. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so the site failed. The site wasn't spun up, but that's, again, not the point. The point is that it is testing this bicycle demo site, and it's doing all the different breakpoints, all the different settings that were set up for this site in advance. So we'll close these examples. All right, so let's actually take a look at that before we continue. let me open up Atom again. Let me open up. If I open up the includes folder, I can actually see what all's in here. So I have this sites to update.js file. If I look in there, it will actually show me the list of the sites and all the configuration related to that. So we have here, here's the New Relic demo option. Here's the Quicksilver demo option. Again, it really just has the reference URL and test URL listed there, bicycle demo option, and it passes those in. There is also this option here for paths to test. So if this wasn't commented out, I mean, it would make for a pretty long demo to have to do that every single time. But in a real world example, maybe you have a few real paths that are included in there, and those are tested in addition. All right, so that's one. If we jump back to our example here, we can actually do this in a slightly different way. We can do npm run start all. And now what it's going to do, if you can't guess, is it's going to do all the sites. So it's actually going to run, create the references, create the test, and then generate that report in a browser for each site in succession. So it's going to run through this and do its thing and then pop up with a report, and then do it for the next thing and then pop up with a report for that one, and then do its thing and then pop up with the third report. So each one right after the other. I'm not going to make you wait through that. It's going to be similar to what we just saw, so I'm going to go ahead and close that. And let's switch back. Yep, so we already took a look at the sites to update.js. And then, of course, we can just make our own. You know, it's easy to look at that example, copy paste, and just create the Pantheon demo site example, and then that would show up on the list. So again, this is meant to be an example that you can take and modify and make into your own example, or write from scratch once you see how it's done. All right, so just a few things to note about this sort of final experiment here. npm run start is what will actually just run just that one site. But we can specify all or a specific site via that single command. So we could do -- and space -- site equals and then the name of your site. So it doesn't actually prompt you. It just automatically goes through. But then you can also have it define like different sites to update on different conditions. So maybe you include this as part of your continuous integration. Maybe you have it included with other advanced examples where you want to test different sites or different versions of sites in different scenarios. To be perfectly honest, I haven't used this specific script enough in a real world example to tell you where it would be a really good use case. But I would love to hear from you guys if you have used this or can think of a great way to use this, how it might work for you, how it might make your life easier. Yep, and let's actually take just a quick look at this other one too here, this backstop config. So typically the backstop.json file is our config, and it's just hard-coded URLs and ports and all those different things. With this specific example, we're putting all that information in the sites to update, and then we're passing it into the backstop config as variables. So again, sites to update has the reference and the URL and all those things. But if we take a look at backstop config, we can see that our viewports are actually configured here, but all of the other ones are just filled in. So our URL is backstop test URL. Our reference URL, backstop reference space URL. So these are being passed in when the script is run. We don't have to manually enter these. All right, and with that, let me switch back. That's really it for this class. Like I said, I hope it was beneficial. It did go very fast, but I did also want to leave some time because I knew I wouldn't have time to help anyone in advance. So we do have a little bit of time to, you can stick around if you want. If you want help installing it or running the examples, I'd love to kind of sit with you for the remainder of the time and actually step through that. But before I did that, I did want to give a little ad for the test or the class that we're running at DrupalCon Seattle. You can sign up for this now. It is available on the website. We're going to be going through Composer fundamentals, the fundamentals of continuous integration and running tests with it. We're also going to be talking about advanced team workflows. So a process that, like I described, where maybe you make a commit, you push it up to your GitHub repo, and then before you do a pull request, all of these tests run, and it compiles, and it builds out your example site, and then you can see it and test it before you accept the pull request and actually push that out to your hosting environment. So again, being from Pantheon, some of these examples are based in Pantheon, but we try to be very agnostic in this class so that it is applicable to other hosting environments or even other continuous integration environments if you prefer something else. Yes, and then finally, we will also be talking about third-party integrations like Slack or other things like that. All right, thank you all very much for coming to Visual Regression Testing with Backstop.js.